We are now just a couple of days away from the release of Leagues 5, and today we're going to be talking about the best way to make early game GP in every region. But before we jump into any region specifically, there are a couple money-making relics that we do already know. The first one being dodgy deals you get from Tier 2, and essentially this relic just gives you a massive buff to your thieving. You'll have a 100% success rate, you can now thieve all NPCs in an 11 by 11 square at the same time, and it will automatically re-pickpocket an NPC until you have the maximum coin pouches, which has already been tripled. Next up for our money-making relics is the Golden God relic. This will be a Tier 4, and Golden God makes it so you get 15% more gold for every time you alch something, and there's a 65% chance you don't consume the item. If we look down here at the example, if you take into account Scavo's Rune Store, which is the store located in the Champions Guild, purchasing something like the Rune Plate Skirt for 64k, with average luck of getting consistently 65% chance of saving, you will get a 126k alch per item. Meaning in the long run, for every time you alch one of these Rune Plate Skirts that you purchase for 65k, you will get a 62k profit. And there is ability that RNG does play a little factor, especially early on when you don't have very much GP yet. But in the long run, Golden God is essentially just infinite GP. Now with the relics out of the way, if we jump into our very first region, we're going to kick things off with Kandarin because it does kind of segue straight from the relics. Kandarin's best early game moneymaker is going to be pickpocketing and thieving. This one does go hand in hand with dodgy deals, but it's also very accessible and honestly still probably the best method to do even if you don't go with that tier 2 relic. Kandarin really just has the best setup and one of the best ways for progression. You kick things off pickpocketing men right out of the gate. You unlock the Cake Stall at level 5, you unlock the Silk Stall at level 20. There are a ton of guards here in the middle of the Arty Square. And then ultimately you work your way up to some of the most consistent GP and XP with Knights of Arty. Thieving and Kandarin have always went hand in hand, and this league is no different. Now the next region up on the list is actually two regions because they also share the exact same method. One of the best early moneymakers in each region is going to be gem cutting at the gem stalls, and the two regions are Desert and Varlamore. I already made an entire guide on this that I will link down in the description below, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But essentially, the bare bones basic version of how this works is you buy uncut gems, you cut them in your inventory, and you sell them back for profit. But a method with very little GP in order to get it out of the gate, only needing 27 or 34 crafting or even 20 to kick things off. And it's not only a great early game moneymaker, but a very good crafting training method. Before we move on, the Desert does have some honorable mentions. Both the Agility Pyramid and Giant's Foundry are very good early game moneymakers. Giant's Foundry does take a little bit more effort to get off the ground, but it can also be a great GP and XP generator. Now before we go any further, I do want to give a little shout out to the starter regions. In most cases, you're not going to worry about trying to make too much money out of the gate in these regions. But there are a couple different ways that offer a little bit of early game GP if you do want to go that route. Scurious is one of them that will most likely require protection prayers and also a decent bit of combat training. But fighting it yourself in a solo instance does offer up the ability to get some rune item drops. Puro with a high hunter level, consistently finding things like magpies and ninjas. There are quite a few items on each of those drop tables that have some nice alch value. And then the last one, and probably the best one out of all three of these methods, is Soul Wars. While the XP has been completely removed from Soul Wars as a reward, Spoils of War still have some incredibly good loot, especially on early starter accounts. Moving on to Korinth or Zaya, we have Wintertot, a moneymaker that has kind of lost its step when it comes to overall moneymakers within the game. But when you break everything down into regions, Wintertot is one that still holds its own. Now before we jump into the final three regions, if we take relics out of the equation, Wilderness is the king of early game money-making regions. The two main methods we're going to talk about are Rev Caves and the Wildy Agility Arena. Rev Caves, even though you can't access it very early because there is access to imps and goblins inside, I imagine they are going to be relatively popular. That method does probably require a little bit of combat training out of the gate, not that that's going to take too long either with the increased XP rates. But with a couple changes to the Wilderness Agility course and only requiring 52 agility to access, one important thing is every time you leave the course or if you get PK'd, your lap count does not reset. Once you get those lap counts accumulated and you start earning those consistent rune items, no matter what happens to you, you can come straight back and keep doing the exact same thing. Anytime you get PK'd in the Wildy, it is just like a PVM death. You don't lose any of your items. And then the big kicker of them all, as a league-specific change, both the Wilderness Agility course and Rev Caves are completely free to access. You do not need the 150k fee to start earning loot at the Agility course, and you don't need 100k GP to get inside of the Rev Caves. As soon as you unlock Wildy, and barring that you have some combat training or 52 agility, you are free to hop straight in and start earning absolute insane GP. Now these final 3 regions, we are kind of just going to group all 3 of them together. The last 3 are Tiranan, Mauritania, and Fremennik. And I'd argue overall these are the 3 worst regions when it comes to making GP right out of the gate in the early game. Fremennik, some of your best options would be like safe spotting the ice trolls, trying to get rune kites and granite shields. Tiranan, you would have regular gauntlet, even though you would still need a decent little chunk of combat training. And Mauritania, your best bet would be something like doing scuffed barrows with very little gear and running around the crypts. And personally, I really wouldn't recommend any of those 3 options. I would either stick to making money in a different region, or just prioritize doing other things on your account and come back to making money later. Because ultimately, these 3 regions turn into what is the best late game money making regions. Mauritania, you get access to gargoyles, which just print alchable items. Not to mention alching the duplicates you get from TOB. Tiranan, you progress into getting things like Zora, even though there's really less alchables on that table now than there used to be. The big ones are Zalcano and then Corrupted Gauntlet. And then with Fremy, you get access to both Vorkath and Muspa. All 3 clearly ranking at the bottom when it comes to early game moneymakers, but also being S tier when it comes to late game. But those are all of the regions in Leagues 5 and some of the best early game ways to make GP. GP isn't always the most necessary thing in leagues as Ironman accounts, but there are still plenty of uses. If you guys did enjoy or found the video helpful, consider dropping a like, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.